So today is a wonderful day of celebration. Memorial Day is this sweet time to remember those who have served us, who've given their all, as we say. And so I'm always grateful to take a moment to just honor that and recognize what an amazing idea we live in. And when I say that, I mean this country, because this country is based on an idea. It's held as an ideal that was put together, and it's sort of, we don't, because we're all used to it, we sort of forget sometimes that the ideal that was put together was that we would be a nation of laws, not of personalities. And so an ideal was formed and established in rejection to an existing culture. And the idea was that we would create an environment and a place where all people were created and equal. Now, even in our founding, we didn't recognize the significance of the statements, and we're evolving always. Because we sort of forgot women. They didn't really, we definitely didn't have black people in there because there was an issue called slavery that we hadn't resolved yet. But the idea that we have formed around an idea has caused us over the years to keep working towards the ideal, towards a more perfect union, as Abraham Lincoln would say. And it hasn't been easy. It's not easy to live from an ideal. I was thinking about this. You see, part of what inspires me about our country is that I see it so much as an embodiment of life, that what we struggle to do as a collective, we also struggle to do individually. That, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you set a vision for yourself, you have a dream in your heart, that we don't always live up to the dream that we say we believe in. At least I don't. I'm not going to, you guys may have all mastered this, but I find myself constantly working towards this question of, is the way I show up in reality a reflection of what I say I believe? And sometimes it is, and sometimes I find myself falling short, of missing the mark. I was reminded of a lovely book written by Dan Millman called The Laws of Spirit, and he talks about the law of integrity, and he says, integrity means living and acting in alignment with spiritual law and with our highest vision, despite impulses to the contrary. From the heart of integrity, we recognize, accept, and express our authentic interior reality, inspiring others not with words, but by our example. So when we are in that place of alignment with our highest vision, then our life is reflecting that. And there are times when there's that what I believe, but then there's what I really believe. And it turns out we live out of what we really believe, often at a subconscious level, right? That we say, we have our wonderful affirmations every Sunday, and we affirm our wealth and our abundance and our health and our wholeness, and we recognize we're all one, and we say, let there be peace on earth, and let it start with me. And some of us get as far as the parking lot, and you're trying to get out of the parking lot, and nobody's letting you in, and that idea of peace beginning with me may take a backseat for a moment, right? Or we get ourselves into situations. But that's why it's important for us to have an ideal. That's why we come back to this idea as a country that there is a constitution, and it's left to each generation to continue to live up to it. I believe we're facing such a time right now as we're in constitutional crisis, and it's an opportunity to come back to say, what do we believe? Then if what we believe is so, how do I act? If I'm looking at the history of this great country of ours, and I'm a person that likes to look at all of history. Now, history is usually written by the winners. Our Christian history is written by that, but we find out there's some other schools of thought. There's a lot there. And so part of the reason we have Black History Month is because it wasn't included originally, and so we had to kind of go back and clean that up as we become more inclusive, and it's a good thing. So when I say, I think we're still a great nation, but I think a great nation can look at its faults and say, oops, we didn't live up to our ideal. You see, I think you can be a great person and even not live up to your ideals every single day. The question for me is, are we working towards the ideal? Am I working to be that? I think Christianity, as I interpret it, wasn't about an ideal of how we show up in the world. That we're kind, and we're compassionate, and we're loving, and we're gracious. That there are no strangers, there's only the humanity, that we're all brothers and sisters in that realm. You see, that's the vision of Christianity that I hold. It is not a specific set of behavior. It is a way of being that calls us to be more compassionate and loving. So in our great nation, we've worked towards this ideal. And I was thinking about this idea. I was thinking about having gone to civil war in a time, people go, this country's never been like this before. I'm like, well, we're not shooting each other, at least, right? We're not having militias. We're not in civil war, but, sometimes it's pretty uncomfortable in the world. And in looking at that, I think about this great leader, Abraham Lincoln, and the ideals that he set forth for us. Because I think he was an imperfect person who strived towards an ideal. And I was struck by the words of his second inaugural, where he writes, the war is just about to come to an end, the Civil War. But in it, he writes, with malice towards none, and with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the light, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, and to bind and to heal the nation's wounds. You see, Abraham Lincoln was a great leader because he kept calling us to that higher vision of ourself. 100 years later, we were still working towards a higher vision, and Martin Luther King stood before a nation and gave the famous I Have a Dream speech, which I just love to read from time to time. It's just, I think, one of the most eloquent and beautiful passages that we have. But you see, even in ending slavery, we hadn't ended the consciousness behind it. And the consciousness behind it is that some are better than others. But our Constitution, even when they didn't even get the words right originally, because they would have said all people are created equal, including women, but they had the ideal. And we've evolved into it. And so 100 years later, as we were really in the throes of the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King stood before this nation and gave this powerful speech. You see, when we have a dream, when we have a vision, then we're always working to live up to it. Martin Luther King was a great leader because he kept inspiring us to live to our higher ideals. And he said, we're not there yet. He said, in a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to follow. The note was a promise that all men, he meant people, we're still working on this, all people, yes, black people as well as white people, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He says it is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note, insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring the sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. I remember being a small child listening to this amazing man. And something stirred within me. And I was aware that we were not done. And I was aware that I had work to do. And I love Martin Luther King because he speaks to us about who we might be. And I dreamed that his 4 children would be friends based on not the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I watched the evolution of this country. And it's never clean. You know, conflict is messy. But we have set as a part of our system a way to deal with conflict. Our founders said, you know, there may be people that forget the ideal from time to time, so we're just going to set this up so nobody has too much power. This little group gets going too much, then there's a way to curtail that. And if, you know, so we have checks and balances. And so, you know, we're always in this thing of learning how to check and balance ourselves. It's a beautiful thing. It doesn't always look pretty, but it's a beautiful thing. So we are in such a time, even now, as we are witnessing the evolution of thought, of inclusivity. So we say, well, you know, if we were really going to do this thing, then perhaps women would have the same rights as men. Perhaps people of whatever color, race, ethnicity, or religion would have the same opportunity. Perhaps people of different identifications or of orientations would have the same right. And so just recently, in the last few years, we said, you know what, you can marry who you love. As a nation. Now, not everybody's on board. Trust me, right? You see, so we're still in the struggle. It's not done. But each of us has the opportunity to bring greater good to the world. So I stand and I bear witness to a powerful idea. As I said, this idea that I think we're a part of. You see, when Jesus spoke, now this is my humble opinion, which you're all entitled to. So when he was speaking, I believe he was speaking to an ideal of what is possible for all of us. We often talk about the great masters, and it is my opinion that there have been many great masters. Jesus is just one in a line, who recognized his unity and his oneness with God and spoke from a place of compassion and understanding and possibility, and called those around him to rise to that awareness. We speak in this teaching about the Christ consciousness, the awareness of all, the awareness of oneness, the awareness of unity. And we believe that the power that Jesus embodied is a power that is available to each one of us. So I often, in conversations with people, they will say, well, what is it you believe? And they want to have this dialogue about Christianity, and I'm just not really interested in that because unless people really want to have an open, honest conversation, that doesn't often happen, you know. But I just say, you know, the idea that you can if the easiest way to wrap your mind around this is to say, we believe that Jesus was the great example rather than the great exception. We believe that he was the embodiment of a way of being and a way of living, that when we are in that state of being, in that state of consciousness, we too can be healers. We too can bless. We too can prosper others. And so for me, I always say, I don't care what you believe, as long as it works for you and you do that well, right? If you want to be Hindu, be the best Hindu you know how to be, right? I mean, for me, it's really insignificant. But do you live up to your ideals? Do I live up to mine? So, not too many years after the Civil War, a dude by the name of Charles Fillmore and his lovely wife Myrtle had insight. And we often speak to the story of Myrtle Fillmore and her struggle with tuberculosis. And she came across this passage that said, if I am a child of God, I cannot inherit sickness. Now, not everybody knows this, but Charles was a little skeptical about Myrtle doing the woo-woo stuff, right? But over a period of time, she healed herself. At the time, there wasn't a lot of other options. That gets your attention. See, when we do this, put down your cane, Susan thing in a minute, you're going to be like, whoa, that was cool. All right? It gets your attention. And so they began to, having sort of a scientific mind, be like, well, so how does this work? How does this work that you can just start saying to yourself, despite the condition, this is what is true. If I am a child of God, if I am a living embodiment of the Spirit, then this is not my inheritance. My inheritance is wholeness. My inheritance is peace. My inheritance is love. My inheritance is joy. My inheritance is abundance. And so they became avid students and writers and teachers. And in 1891, so 1891, so this isn't that many years after the Civil War. I'm just kind of, it's interesting to me to think about this. In 1891, Charles has this meditative insight. And it says the word is unity. This thing that you're doing is unity. And they worked with that idea. And they began to understand and study and teach these principles. And they realized that it was duplicatable. It wasn't just an odd thing that Myrtle had done. But they began to realign their world around these ideas of unity, of oneness with the divine. 12 years later, 1903, they started this thing. I want to get it right. They formed the first Unity Society of Practical Christianity. Unity Society. They were not looking to start a church or a sect, but they wanted a way to teach these principles. And they took their acumen and they began what we now know as the Daily Word, the magazine. They began the Ministry of Prayer, the Silent Unity, which has gone on since all of these years. It's a lovely thing to think. Since 1903, somebody's praying. That makes me feel better just in itself, right? So, unity hasn't been perfect in living up to its ideals. Oh, figure that out. I always say, church would be so much easier if it weren't for all these darn people. When it lives as an organizational chart on a wall somewhere, it's really simple. But then you get people, and they have personalities, and they have, all their issues, and that's what we're here to do, is to grow up all over each other. Is to learn and to love and to grow, because we're working towards an ideal. We honor and celebrate Charles and Myrtle, but we don't worship them. We honor and celebrate Jesus, but we don't worship him. We honor and celebrate all the teachers, all the masters, but we don't mistake the messenger for the message. Greater works than these you will also do. It's right there. You can read it. Greater works than these you will also do. When we take that to heart, and we stand in that place as Myrtle did and said, this is my inheritance. Freely given. Freely given. But I must work towards that vision all of the time. I must hold in my mind and heart the vision. The dream, if you will. We continue to work towards the dream. Now, I often share this, but I think it's important to recognize just how our minds work. It's a wonderful, Lou Tice has a wonderful book on this idea of how the mind works. And he talks about this idea that when we set a vision for ourselves, we say, you know what? I'm going to be rich. Or I'm going to do this thing. Or I'm going to start this. I'm going to do this thing that I've not done before. And we set that vision for ourselves. Then there's this place called our vision, and there's a place called our current reality. And in between our current reality and the vision is this thing that is called cognitive dissonance. And our minds don't particularly like that feeling. Our minds don't particularly love being out of sorts. So one of two things happens. Either we rise our reality up to the level of the vision that we hold, or to get back to non-dissonance, if that's a word. If it isn't, I just coined it. Then we bring the vision back down to reality. That realistic thinking. So we're always in this thing. So I say, even as a country, we're always in this thing because we have this high vision. And we haven't yet lived up to it. We make steps forward and we take a step back and we take the long arc of history or long arc of justice, as Dr. King said, is towards the good. And so for me, when I get too caught up in the day to day, I remember we're working on it. We're getting better. We're getting smarter. You've probably noticed, if you've been in this teaching for a long time, this isn't some weird, radical, secret thing anymore. It stopped being a secret as soon as they called it a secret. And everybody knew it, right? Which is true with all secrets, by the way. I'm always like, people are like, can I have this announcement? It's like, no, do announcements. Just tell 3 people you got a secret. And, before you know it, everybody in the church will know, and it'll be good, Right? We're watching this, but we're not done. I'm watching my life, and I'm not done. I don't need to be done. I just need to keep working. But I do find it essential that I stay in the spiritual practice of the visioning, of the listening to, of the allowing, of what is it I believe, and how must I grow, or what must I release in order to live from that state of being. You see, sometimes I find that I can't take out my worn-out resentments with me into the land of peace and joy. I got to leave them behind. Got to let them go, right? And I must take on new tools and new skills to move into this place. So all of this is to say that we're in a process. You and I are all in a process. We talk all the time. You know, it's nice to think that there's going to be a point we're done. Maybe there is. I don't know where it is, but maybe that's true. But in the meantime, the work of spiritual practice is to practice. That may be why they call it that. I'm not certain, right? The work is to stay in the invisible. I was sharing with a friend recently about this idea, this process of manifestation. Part of manifestation is done in the invisible, in the vision, in the mission, the vision of who I want to be, the purpose for doing that. And then as I move into the process of manifestation, then I've got to move into the physical, develop the skills, develop the resources, have an action plan, so that that comes into being in fulfillment. Sometimes people that are very worldly oriented want to do the skills and resources and action plan and forget about the vision. And sometimes woo-woo type people want to just be in the vision thinking that it's going to instantly manifest. Poof! I was sitting on my couch thinking money, and then money came raining out of the heavens, and yay me, right? So to me, this idea of being spiritual, we do the spiritual work. And then we move into the worldly part of it from that place of inspiration, that place of understanding. Martin Luther King stood before a nation and said, I have a dream. And he put forth a vision, but he didn't end there. Then he went to work the next day to make that be so. So, my friends, we sit in an exciting, exciting time. And I love being part of a spiritual community that allows me to practice, that allows me to remember who I am, just as I help you to remember who you are. And that when we forget, we can hold each other up to what is possible, to what is real. It's a beautiful thing. So I celebrate and honor you this weekend. I'm grateful for the opportunity that we have to be together. And I recognize and know that the work continues. So let us be gentle and loving and patient with ourselves as we continue to grow and to evolve and to become that Christ-like self. Let us pray. As we open our hearts in this moment to that presence of unconditional love, Jesus said to us, in my house, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. Which is to say, in the universe, there are many dimensions. He said, I go to prepare a place for you, that you might join me there. I believe that state, that place is a state of being. That the Christed ones, the Buddhic ones, the enlightened ones live from. Who sought to teach us that yes, while we are human, there is a part of us that is absolutely spiritual in origin, that is whole and perfect and complete. And that as we return to the vision, as we return to the remembrance of who we are, we find power. And we speak our word with clarity and conviction. For we know that greater works, these we shall also do. So today we speak that word of truth. We recognize and know that wholeness is our divine inheritance. And we know that that wholeness is revealing itself as health and well-being and vitality. We know that love is indeed the only reality. And where we allow light to shine, darkness is cast out. Where we allow love to shine, everything unlike it dissipates. So we choose love. We choose forgiveness. We choose compassion. We recognize and know that we are abundant beings because we live, move, and have our very being in the source. And so we joyously participate in divine flow, joyously giving, graciously receiving of the divine bounty. We call forth that vision of our heart and know that with the vision comes all that is necessary for its fulfillment. And so we give thanks for the vision, for the opportunity, and yes, for the challenges of bringing it forward. How grateful I am to speak this word of truth this day. And I simply invite you, if there's a burden on your heart, to simply, in this moment, lift it up to the divine altar. To be willing to let go and to allow God's love, God's grace, God's infinite being to replace it. It is good. We are blessed. And so in joy, in gratitude, we simply extend this blessing. We bless this spiritual community. We bless this larger community of which we are a part. We are recognizing the brotherhood and sisterhood of all humanity. We're holding a high vision for a planet at peace, for a world that works for all. And as always, we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of all faiths. We honor the many pathways to divine understanding and fulfillment. And how grateful I am to bear witness to this truth. Releasing this word into the Christ power, the Christ mind, the laws of the universe. I simply accept it as done for the highest good of all. In joy and gratitude, then I simply allow it to be, as together we say, and so it is. Amen.